The drive to my parents' house in suburban Boston had never felt so long. Each mile marker increased the knot in my stomach as Vanessa sat beside me, humming softly to the radio, oblivious to my mounting dread. She looked radiant that spring afternoon, her dark hair catching sunlight through the car window, her smile relaxed and confident. I'd spent 2 months gathering the courage to introduce her to my family, convinced that this time would be different. This time, I had someone special, someone accomplished, someone who inexplicably chose to be with me despite my ordinary existence. As we turned onto the elm-lined street of my childhood home, I couldn't have predicted how those next 4 hours would unravel years of carefully constructed self-perception. When my father's booming laugh echoed across the dinner table, followed by the words, "She's too good for you, son," I realized I hadn't imagined the worst-case scenario at all. The humiliation was just the beginning of a journey that would force me to confront truths about my family, myself, and the foundations of my own worth that I'd spent 28 years avoiding. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Most people meet the love of their life somewhere picturesque: a coffee shop with exposed brick walls, a bookstore with rolling ladders, a farmer's market on a crisp autumn morning. I met Vanessa Mitchell in the fluorescent-lit basement of Boston City Hall, both of us clutching numbered tickets while waiting to contest parking violations. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, checking her watch for the 3rd time in as many minutes. "I've been here for 45 minutes, and they've called exactly 7 numbers. At this rate, we'll both have accumulated new tickets by the time they get to us," I replied, gesturing to the wall clock that seemed permanently stuck at 2:17 p.m. despite the second hand's continuous movement. She laughed, a genuine unguarded sound that seemed out of place in the bureaucratic gloom. "I'm Vanessa," she said, extending her hand. "Fellow victim of Boston's predatory parking enforcement." "Noah Parker," I introduced myself, struck by the warmth of her handshake and the direct way she maintained eye contact. "What's your alleged crime against the city?" "Apparently, I parked within 30 feet of a stop sign that's partially hidden by an overgrown maple tree," she explained, indignation coloring her voice. "What about you?" "Expired meter. By 4 minutes." The parking enforcement officer was literally standing there, watching my meter run out. I was running back with quarters. Vanessa shook her head, a strand of dark hair escaping her neat ponytail. "They really do lie in wait, don't they? Like municipal predators." Our shared frustration with city bureaucracy turned into a conversation that spanned topics from urban planning to favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurants in Somerville. By the time her number was called, an hour had slipped by almost pleasantly. "Wish me luck," she said, gathering her documents. "Maybe I'll see you on the other side of justice." "I'll save your seat," I promised, surprised by my own boldness when I added, "And maybe we could grab coffee after, to celebrate our victories or commiserate our losses." The smile she gave me, slightly surprised but genuinely pleased, made the 4-hour wait at City Hall entirely worthwhile. I've never been the guy who gets the girl. In high school, I was firmly in the middle tier of the social hierarchy, not popular enough to be invited to the best parties, not unpopular enough to be actively bullied, just invisible enough to move through 4 years without making a lasting impression. At Northeastern University, I studied business administration, graduated with a respectable but unremarkable 3.4 GPA, and secured a solid but unexciting job at a mid-sized insurance company. At 28, I had a decent apartment in Cambridge, a reliable group of friends, and a dating history best described as sporadically adequate. Vanessa Mitchell was different. Not just beautiful, though she was, with expressive hazel eyes, a smile that transformed her entire face, and a confidence in her movements that drew attention without seeking it. She was brilliant. A pediatric surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, she had graduated top of her class at Harvard Medical School, published research on innovative approaches to childhood tumor removal, and recently returned from a medical mission in Guatemala. She spoke 3 languages, volunteered at an animal shelter on her rare days off, and could debate everything from healthcare policy to obscure indie films with equal passion. "Why are you single?" I blurted out during our 3rd date, a boat ride along the Charles River. The question had been rattling around my brain since our coffee after City Hall, when I'd first glimpsed the depth of her intellect and accomplishments. She laughed, trailing her fingers through the water as we drifted. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one," I admitted, feeling heat rise to my face. "You're incredible. Smart, beautiful, accomplished. You could probably have anyone." "I'm just wondering why you're spending a Saturday afternoon with an insurance adjuster whose biggest achievement was winning the company's fantasy football league last year." Vanessa studied me, amusement fading into something more serious. "You really don't see it, do you?" "See what?" "That you're interesting, Noah. You're thoughtful and genuinely kind, not in that performative way so many people are. You listen when I talk about complicated surgeries that would make most people queasy. You remember details about my life that I barely mentioned. And you're the only person I've met in years who doesn't immediately turn the conversation to themselves and their accomplishments." I stared at her, unsure how to process this description of myself that felt so at odds with my self-perception. For why I'm single," she continued, "relationships haven't been a priority. Between medical school, residency, fellowship, there wasn't much time, and most of the men I met either couldn't handle my schedule or were too busy competing with me." She shrugged. "Being alone was easier than dealing with fragile egos." "And what about my ego?" I asked, half joking. Her smile returned, warm and genuine. "Your ego seems remarkably intact for someone who just self-deprecatingly called their career a mere insurance adjuster. Which, by the way, is a job that helps people rebuild their lives after tragedy. That matters." I didn't know how to respond to her reframing of my ordinary existence as something meaningful. No one had ever looked at me the way Vanessa did, as if I were someone worth knowing, worth spending time with, worth choosing. As spring turned to early summer, our relationship deepened with a speed and intensity that surprised us both. We fell into an easy rhythm, weeknight dinners at her apartment when she wasn't on call, weekend adventures exploring coastal towns north of Boston, long conversations about everything and nothing. For the first time, I found myself in a relationship that didn't require pretense or performance. Vanessa saw me, really saw me, and somehow, inexplicably, wanted to stay. The inevitable meet-the-family moment loomed. Vanessa had already introduced me to her parents, retired professors who lived in a book-filled brownstone in Cambridge. They were warm, intellectually curious people who asked thoughtful questions about my work and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. By dessert, I was engaged in a friendly debate with her father about insurance industry regulations, while her mother showed me their collection of first-edition novels. "They loved you," Vanessa assured me afterward. "Dad already texted asking when you can come back for the next round of their ongoing chess tournament. My family would be different." And that difference was the source of the dread pooling in my stomach as we drove to suburban Wellesley that fateful Sunday afternoon. The guy. Parkers weren't academics or professionals. My father, Dennis, had worked his way up from the loading dock to regional manager at a grocery distribution company through what he called grit and handshakes. My mother, Linda, had been a receptionist at the same company until I was born, then transitioned to a combination of part-time bookkeeping and full-time community gossip distribution. My younger brother, Tyler, had followed my father into the business, and at 25 was already out-earning me as a sales representative. Success in the Parker household was measured in straightforward terms: income, possessions, and status. Within the tight social circle of my parents' longtime friends, My choice to pursue a college degree had been met with grudging support, tempered by frequent reminders that Tyler was making real money, while I was burning through tuition. My subsequent career path was tolerated but not celebrated, viewed as an unnecessary detour from the family's proven route to financial security. They can be a bit direct, I warned Vanessa as we pulled into the driveway of my parents' modest colonial. Don't take anything they say too personally. I deal with anxious parents every day, she reassured me, squeezing my hand. I can handle a little directness, if only it had been just a little. The initial introductions went as expected, my mother's assessing gaze taking in Vanessa's simple but elegant sundress and understated jewelry, my father's too firm handshake and booming questions about what kind of doctor cuts open little kids, and Tyler's barely concealed once-over that lingered inappropriately. Noah tells us you work at Mass General, my mother said, as she ushered us into the living room where cheese and crackers waited on the coffee table. That must be very stressful. It can be, Vanessa acknowledged, accepting the glass of white wine my mother pressed into her hand. But it's incredibly rewarding to help children and their families through difficult times. And the money must be good, my father interjected with a wink. Doctors do all right for themselves, don't they? I winced. Dad, maybe we could wait until at least the main course before discussing salaries? What? It's a compliment, he protested, raising his hands in mock surrender. Nothing wrong with acknowledging success. Vanessa handled it gracefully. The compensation is fair, but I actually chose pediatric surgery because it's one of the lower-paying specialties. I wanted to work with kids more than I wanted a certain income bracket. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. This concept, choosing fulfillment over maximum financial gain, was clearly foreign to my family, judging by the baffled expressions that greeted her statement. Well, that's admirable, my mother said, in the same tone she might use to describe someone's decision to live in a yurt. Noah has always been sensitive too, always worried about doing the meaningful thing rather than the practical thing. The way she said meaningful, like it was a naive indulgence rather than a legitimate priority, made me sink slightly lower in my seat. Dinner itself was a minefield of subtle and not-so-subtle digs. My mother quizzed Vanessa about her family background, clearly fishing for potential flaws or shortcomings. My father dominated the conversation with stories about his business triumphs, each anecdote carefully crafted to emphasize his success, despite his lack of formal education. Tyler contributed occasional comments about his recent sales achievements and the new car he was considering purchasing. Through it all, Vanessa remained poised and engaged, asking thoughtful questions and finding common ground where possible. She complimented my mother's cooking, discussed supply chain logistics with my father, and even managed to have a civil exchange with Tyler about his interest in mountain biking. The breaking point came during dessert, my mother's signature apple pie with vanilla ice cream. So, Vanessa, my father said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied air of a man who has just consumed 3 helpings of everything. What exactly do you see in our Noah here? The question hung in the air, its phrasing suggesting genuine curiosity, but its tone implying something else entirely. Dad, I started to object, but Vanessa placed her hand over mine on the table. I see someone kind and thoughtful, she answered without hesitation. Someone who approaches the world with empathy and consideration. Noah has a quiet strength that I admire. He knows who he is and doesn't feel the need to prove himself constantly. My father's eyebrows rose. Quiet strength, huh? That's one way of putting it. He chuckled, glancing at my mother and Tyler as if sharing a private joke. I've always told Noah he needs to be more assertive, put himself out there more. The world doesn't reward quiet anything. Different strengths serve different purposes, Vanessa replied evenly. In my work, I've found that sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the one with the most valuable contribution. Well, in my experience, my father countered, his voice taking on the edge it always did when he felt challenged. The guy who speaks up gets the promotion, the raise, the recognition. The quiet ones get overlooked. Is that why Noah's been passed over at his company? Tyler chimed in, his expression all faux concern. I keep telling him he needs to man up a bit, show some backbone. Heat crept up my neck as Vanessa turned to me with a questioning look. I hadn't told her about being passed over for the senior adjuster position 3 months earlier, a disappointment I was still processing privately. I wasn't passed over, I clarified, trying to keep my voice steady. Jenkins had more specific experience with commercial properties. It made sense for him to get the role. My father's laugh boomed across the table. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Always making excuses for getting the short end of the stick instead of demanding better. He shook his head, turning to Vanessa. Honestly, I look at you two together, and I have to wonder what you're doing with him. Dennis, my mother murmured in weak protest. What? I'm just saying what we're all thinking, he continued, warming to his theme. You're a surgeon at one of the best hospitals in the country. You're clearly smart, accomplished, beautiful, and Noah's Noah. He gestured vaguely in my direction, as if my mediocrity was a visible aura surrounding me. He's a good kid, don't get me wrong, he added, as if this qualifier somehow softened the assessment. But let's be real here. She's too good for you, son. The words landed like a physical blow. Not because they were shocking, they perfectly articulated the insecurity that had haunted me since my first date with Vanessa. But because hearing them spoken aloud at my parents' dinner table, in front of the woman I was falling in love with, stripped them of any plausible deniability. This wasn't my own self-doubt. It was how my family truly saw me. Vanessa's hand tightened around mine. Excuse me? It's a compliment to you, my father clarified, oblivious to the tension suddenly crackling in the room. Noah's lucky to have snagged someone like you. Punching. Above his weight class, as they say, Tyler snickered. My mother busied herself with serving more ice cream, her silence its own form of agreement. I think, Vanessa said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel I'd never heard before, that you fundamentally misunderstand your son. My father blinked, clearly not expecting pushback. I've known him his entire life. I think I understand him just fine. Do you? Vanessa's question was simple but pointed, because the Noah Parker I know isn't someone anyone would be too good for. He's someone who listens to his elderly neighbors' stories for hours because he knows they're lonely. He's someone who helped my colleague move apartments on his day, off because her husband was deployed overseas. He's someone who remembers the name of every receptionist, janitor, and cafeteria worker in my hospital because he believes everyone deserves to be acknowledged. The table had gone silent, all eyes on Vanessa as she continued, her words measured but intense. The Noah I know stayed up all night researching financial assistance programs for one of my patients' families who couldn't afford their child's medication. He's someone who sees people, really sees them, not for what they can do for him or how they reflect on him, but for who they inherently are. She turned to face me directly, her eyes fierce with a conviction that made my throat tight. That kind of character isn't measured by job titles or salary brackets or how aggressively someone promotes themselves. It's measured by the impact you have on the people around you, and by that measure, Noah is exceptional. The silence that followed her speech was deafening. My father's expression cycled through surprise, defensiveness, and confusion. My mother stared at her half-empty wine glass. Tyler suddenly found the pattern of the tablecloth fascinating. I sat frozen, unable to reconcile Vanessa's description with the person I believed myself to be. In her words, I sounded like someone worthy of admiration, not pity or condescension. Someone with value beyond measurable achievements or status markers. Someone I didn't recognize but desperately wanted to be. "Well," my father finally said, forcing a chuckle that fell flat in the tense atmosphere. "She certainly believes in you. I'll give her that." "It's not about belief," Vanessa corrected him. "It's about observation and respect." The remainder of the evening passed in strained small talk. My father, unaccustomed to having his assessments challenged, retreated into uncharacteristic taciturnity. My mother made valiant attempts to salvage the atmosphere with offerings of coffee and comments about the unseasonably warm weather. Tyler oscillated between awkward silence and forced joviality. When we finally said our goodbyes, earlier than originally planned, the farewell hugs were stiff and perfunctory. In the car, driving away from the house where I'd grown up but never quite belonged, I waited for Vanessa to speak first, certain that the evening had irrevocably altered her perception of me, of us. "I'm sorry," she finally said as we merged onto the highway back toward Boston. I glanced at her, surprised. "You're sorry? For what?" "For speaking so forcefully to your family. It wasn't my place to defend me when my own father was humiliating me at the dinner table?" I interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping before I could contain it. "You have nothing to apologize for." She was quiet for a moment, streetlights intermittently illuminating her thoughtful expression. "They don't see you, Noah." "Not really." The simple observation unlocked something in my chest, a truth I'd spent my life avoiding. "No, they don't. They never have." The realization should have been devastating. Instead, it felt like putting down a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. My family's assessment of my worth wasn't an objective truth. It was a narrative they'd constructed, based on their own limited values and perspectives. "I need to ask you something," I said as we neared the city, the skyline glittering against the night sky. "Did you mean what you said back there? About who I am?" Vanessa turned in her seat to face me, her expression serious. "Every word. That's who you are to me, Noah. That's who you are, period." "I don't always see myself that way," I admitted, the confession both frightening and freeing. "I know," she said softly. "That's why I plan to keep reminding you until you do." As we drove through the familiar streets of Cambridge toward her apartment, something fundamental had shifted. The humiliation of my father's laughter and dismissive words still stung, but alongside that pain was a dawning recognition. Maybe the problem wasn't that I failed to measure up to some objective standard of worth. Maybe the problem was that I'd internalized a value system that was never designed to recognize what truly mattered. What I couldn't have known then was that the disastrous dinner at my parents' house was just the beginning, the first domino, in a series of events that would force me to confront not just my relationship with my family, but fundamental questions about ambition, authenticity, and what it means to live a life of purpose. As Vanessa and I navigated the aftermath of that evening, new challenges would emerge that would test not only our relationship, but the very foundation of my self-understanding. The week following the dinner with my parents passed in a blur of work obligations and emotional avoidance. I threw myself into claims processing with unprecedented focus, staying late at the office to avoid my empty apartment and the thoughts that waited there. Vanessa's surgical schedule kept her at the hospital for extended hours, our communication limited to brief texts and one hurried phone call between her procedures. By Friday, the distance felt deliberate on my part, a protective measure against the inevitable fallout I was convinced would come. After all, hearing my family articulate my deepest insecurities had to have planted doubts in Vanessa's mind, regardless of her passionate defense in the moment. When my phone rang at 6:30 p.m., as I was still at my desk reviewing a particularly complex water damage claim, I hesitated before answering. "You've been avoiding me," Vanessa stated without preamble, her voice tired but direct. "I've been busy," I countered weakly, glancing around the nearly empty office. I was the only one still at my desk, surrounded by the glow of fluorescent lights and the hum of the HVAC system. So have I, but I'm not hiding. Her accuracy stung. I'm not, Noah, she interrupted gently. I know what's happening. Your father voiced the fears you've had since our first date, and now you're convinced I'll eventually agree with him. You're pulling away before I can. The precision of her assessment left me momentarily speechless. I'm off at 8, she continued. I'll pick up dinner from that Thai place you like and come to your apartment. Unless you have another excuse? The challenge in her question was clear. No excuses, I conceded. I'll see you around 8:30. True to her word, Vanessa arrived at my Cambridge apartment with bags of pad thai and spring rolls, still wearing scrubs under her coat, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked exhausted but determined as she set the food on my kitchen counter and turned to face me. We need to talk about Sunday, she said, dispensing with small talk entirely. I busied myself with plates and utensils. What's there to talk about? My family made complete fools of themselves, embarrassed me thoroughly, and confirmed every insecurity I've ever had. Pretty straightforward. Is that how you see it? Because that's not what I witnessed at all. I paused in my movements, genuinely confused. You were there. You heard what they said. I heard people who have a fundamentally flawed understanding of success and worth trying to make sense of a relationship that doesn't fit their narrow worldview. She stepped closer, gently taking the plates from my hands and setting them aside. Their reaction says everything about them and nothing about you. Easy for you to say, I countered, unable to meet her eyes. You're the one they think is too good for me. And you believe them. It wasn't a question. How could I not? You're extraordinary, Vanessa. You save children's lives. You've published research papers. You speak multiple languages. I adjust insurance claims and occasionally help old ladies find their paperwork. Vanessa sighed, running a hand through her hair. Do you know what I dealt with today? A 6-year-old with a brain tumor. His prognosis is poor, and I had to tell his parents that our options are limited. I spent 40 minutes with them while they processed the worst news of their lives. The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. I'm sorry. That sounds devastating. It was. And do you know what got me through that conversation and the difficult surgery that preceded it? Thinking about how you would handle it. Me? The confusion in my voice was genuine. Yes, you. Because that ability you have to really see people, to hold space for their pain without trying to fix it or minimize it, that's rare, Noah. It's a gift. And it's exactly what that family needed today. She moved to the couch, sinking into it with the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been on her feet for 12 hours. I followed, settling beside her but maintaining a careful distance. My colleagues are brilliant surgeons, she continued. Technical geniuses. But some of them can barely look patients' families in the eye when delivering bad news. They see medicine as a series of problems to solve rather than people to help. That's different, I protested. Your work matters in a way mine never will. Does it? She challenged. Last month you told me about that elderly couple whose house flooded, the ones with the vintage photo albums that were water damaged. You spent your entire weekend helping them salvage what could be saved, then connecting them with a restoration specialist for the rest. I shrugged, uncomfortable with her praise. Anyone would have done that. No, they wouldn't. Most people would have processed the claim by the book and moved on. You saw what those photos meant to them, their entire history together, and you went above and beyond to preserve it. Her hand found mine on the couch between us. That couple didn't need a Harvard-educated surgeon that day. They needed someone who understood that their loss wasn't just about property damage. They needed you. Something in her words penetrated the armor of self-doubt I'd been reinforcing for years. I never thought about it that way. I know. That's part of what makes you special, You don't calculate the value of your actions. You just do what's right because it's right. She squeezed my hand. Your family measures worth by salary and status. I measure it by its impact on human lives. By that metric, Noah Parker, you are exceptional. We ate our Thai food sitting cross-legged. On the living room floor, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, a quirky patient on Vanessa's ward, the office politics drama I'd been avoiding all week. By the time we finished, something had loosened in my chest, allowing me to breathe more fully than I had since the disastrous dinner. As Vanessa was leaving, she paused at the door. Your family's opinion of you isn't a fact, Noah. It's just that, an opinion, and it's one formed through a very limited lens. She kissed me softly. I'm choosing to see you through a different lens. I hope eventually you'll do the same. Her words stayed with me long after she left, echoing in my mind as I lay awake that night. What if my understanding of my own worth had been fundamentally skewed by the values my family had instilled? What if there were different, equally valid ways to measure a life well lived? The following Monday brought an unexpected development at work. Jenkins, the colleague who had received the promotion I'd been passed over for, stopped by my desk looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Got a minute? He asked, gesturing toward one of the small conference rooms. Once the door closed behind us, he got straight to the point. I'm drowning in the commercial division. The Anderson Hotel's claim is a nightmare, multiple properties, inconsistent documentation, and their legal team is impossible. I nodded, familiar with the Anderson account's reputation for complexity. That's a tough one. I need help, Jenkins admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. Specifically, your help. You've always had a knack for dealing with difficult clients, getting them to cooperate without making them feel cornered. The request caught me off guard. Jenkins had always been competitive, rarely acknowledging others' strengths or seeking assistance. You're asking me to help with your biggest account? I clarified. Co-manage it, he corrected, with proper credit, when we resolve it. Wallace already approved the arrangement. Wallace was our department director, a taciturn man who rarely involved himself in claim assignments. Why me? I asked, genuinely curious. Jenkins looked uncomfortable. Because you're good with people in a way I'm not. You build trust. The Anderson representative specifically asked about you after that conference in New York, where you spoke on the panel about hospitality industry claims. I remembered the panel. I'd been a last-minute replacement for a colleague with laryngitis, and had spoken without much preparation, focusing on real-world examples and practical approaches rather than technical jargon. I didn't realize anyone remembered that, I admitted. Apparently, Anderson's VP of Properties was in the audience. He mentioned your refreshing lack of insurance doublespeak when I spoke with him last week. The conversation with Jenkins shifted, something in my professional self-perception. I had always viewed my people skills as a soft, ancillary quality, useful but secondary to technical knowledge or assertiveness. Now I was being sought out specifically for that attribute, not despite it. That evening I called my brother Tyler, a conversation I would normally have avoided but now felt necessary. We hadn't spoken since the dinner, his text message the following day. Dad was harsh but not wrong, bro. Having effectively ended communication. Noah? He sounded surprised to hear from me. What's up? I wanted to talk about Sunday night, I said directly, newfound confidence steadying my voice. Look, if you're calling for an apology, I'm not, I interrupted. I'm calling to tell you that I reject the way our family measures success and worth. It's limited, Tyler. There are other ways to live a meaningful life besides maximizing income and status. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Is this about what Dad said? Because he was just being Dad. You know how he is. This is about me deciding that I don't have to accept his assessment, or yours, or Mom's. I've spent my entire life trying to meet standards that were never going to fulfill me, even if I had reached them. So what? You're suddenly above caring. What your family thinks. His defensiveness was evident. Not above caring, just choosing to evaluate those thoughts more critically. Dad's definition of success isn't universal. It's just one perspective, shaped by his own experiences and limitations. Another lengthy pause. This is because of her, isn't it? Your doctor girlfriend has you thinking you're too good for us now. This has nothing to do with Vanessa being a doctor, I clarified. It has everything to do with her helping me see value in qualities I've always dismissed because our family never prioritized them. Like what? The challenge in his voice was clear. Empathy, integrity, the ability to truly listen to people and connect with them, using whatever skills I have to make someone's worst day a little better. That doesn't pay the bills, Noah. Actually, it does. I was asked to co-manage our biggest account today specifically because of those qualities. I paused, considering my next words carefully. But even if it didn't, even if those attributes never led to a promotion or a raise, they would still be valuable. They would still matter. Tyler's response was surprisingly subdued. I don't know how to have this conversation with you. The admission revealed more about our family dynamics than any argument could have. We lacked the language, the framework, for discussing worth beyond financial metrics. I know, I acknowledged. We were never taught how, but I'm learning. After hanging up, I felt lighter. Not because the conversation had gone particularly well, but because I had articulated my evolving perspective out loud for the first time. The act of speaking these realizations gave them substance, transformed them from nebulous feelings into concrete principles. Over the next few weeks, my relationship with Vanessa deepened as we navigated busy schedules to carve out meaningful time together. I began to notice how she balanced her demanding career with deliberate attention to her own well-being and connections, something I had never prioritized. Medical school teaches you how to diagnose and treat diseases, she explained one evening, as we walked along the Charles River. But it doesn't teach you how to sustain yourself through a career of witnessing suffering. I had to learn that the hard way during residency when I nearly burned out. What changed? I asked, curious about the self-awareness she brought to every aspect of her life. I realized that my ability to help patients diminished significantly when I wasn't taking care of myself. It wasn't selfish to need rest, connection, joy. It was necessary. She smiled, nudging my shoulder with hers. That's partly why dating you has been so good for me. You remind me there's a world outside the hospital. You help me stay human. Her framing startled me. The idea that our relationship benefited her as much as it did me challenged the lingering belief that I was merely a recipient of her generosity rather than an equal partner. The Anderson Hotel's account proved to be as challenging as Jenkins had warned. We spent long hours reconciling conflicting documentation, negotiating with contractors, and navigating the labyrinthine corporate structure to reach decision-makers. Yet I found myself energized rather than drained by the complexity, particularly when interactions with the clients required a delicate touch. You have a gift for this, Jenkins commented after a particularly tense video conference where I had managed to diffuse the client's frustration and redirect it toward constructive problem-solving. They were ready to escalate to their attorneys, and somehow you got them collaborating with us instead. I just treated them like people, not adversaries, I explained. They're stressed because these claims affect their business operations and employee livelihoods. Acknowledging that goes a long way. Jenkins shook his head. I would have focused on policy language and coverage limitations, tried to establish boundaries. Sometimes the technical approach isn't the most effective one, I observed, the irony of this role reversal not lost on me. Jenkins had always been the ambitious one, focused on climbing the corporate ladder through assertiveness and technical expertise. Now, he was taking notes on my people-centered approach. 3 months after the fateful dinner with my parents, Wallace called me into his office. The Anderson account had been successfully resolved, with both Jenkins and I receiving commendation from the client's executive team. "I've been watching your work these past few months," Wallace said without preamble, "particularly how you handled the Anderson situation." I waited, unsure where the conversation was heading. "We're restructuring the department," he continued, "creating a new position, Client Relations Director. The role would focus on managing our most complex accounts, particularly those requiring special handling and relationship building." He slid a folder across his desk toward me. "Your name is at the top of my list. It would mean a significant promotion and salary increase." I opened the folder, scanning the job description and compensation package. The role would leverage exactly the skills Vanessa had helped me recognize as valuable: empathy, communication, relationship building. Skills I had always possessed but had dismissed as secondary, just as my family had. "I'd like to be considered," I said, surprising myself, with the confidence in my voice. Just months ago, I would have questioned whether I deserved such an opportunity, whether I was qualified. Now I recognize that my unique approach to client management was precisely what made me suited for the role. That evening, I shared the news with Vanessa over dinner at her apartment. Her pride was evident, but not surprising. What did surprise me was my own response to the opportunity. "The most remarkable thing," I told her as we sat on her balcony watching the city lights shimmer, "is that I'm excited about this role not because of the title or the money, but because it aligns with what I'm actually good at, what I enjoy doing." "That's how it should be," she replied, her hand finding mine in the gathering darkness. "Work that leverages your natural strengths rather than forcing you to become someone you're not." I hesitated before asking my next question. "Should I tell my family?" Vanessa considered this thoughtfully. "That depends on why you want to tell them. Is it to gain their approval, to prove them wrong, or simply to share news about your life?" The question cut to the heart of my evolving relationship with my parents and brother. "I think it's complicated. Part of me wants them to see that their way isn't the only path to success, that the qualities they dismissed as weaknesses turned out to be professional assets. And the other part? The other part knows that even with this promotion, even with the salary increase, I'll never fully satisfy their metrics for success. And I'm starting to be okay with that." Vanessa squeezed my hand. "That's the real victory, Noah. Not the promotion, though I'm incredibly proud of you for that. The victory is recognizing that your worth isn't contingent on their validation." As we sat together in comfortable silence, I reflected on the journey of the past 3 months. My father's dismissive laughter and cruel words at that Sunday dinner had triggered a painful but necessary re-examination of how I valued myself and my contributions to the world. Vanessa hadn't changed me. She had simply held up a different mirror, one that reflected qualities I had always possessed but never fully appreciated. What I couldn't have anticipated then was how this shifting self-perception would soon collide with a family crisis that would test not only my newfound confidence, but the very foundations of the Parker family dynamic. The promotion at work was just the beginning of a transformation that would ultimately force not just me, but everyone in my family, to reconsider what truly matters when life's fragile nature is suddenly, starkly revealed. My first month as client Relations Director brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. While the core of the job aligned perfectly with my strengths, building trust, diffusing tension, finding creative solutions to complex problems, the leadership aspects pushed me far outside my comfort zone. I now managed a team of 5 adjusters, each with their own working styles and personalities, requiring me to develop a previously untapped ability to delegate and direct rather than simply execute. Wallace proved to be an unexpected ally, offering guidance without micromanagement. "You were promoted because you bring something unique to the role," he reminded me during one of our weekly check-ins. "Don't try to lead like Jenkins or me or anyone else. Figure out your own approach." At home, I transformed my spare bedroom into a proper office, investing in a standing desk and better lighting. Vanessa helped me select artwork for the walls, abstract pieces that somehow managed to be both calming and energizing. Your work environment should reflect your values, she explained, hanging a painting of interwoven blue and green shapes that reminded me of water. You'll be spending hours here making decisions that affect people's lives. The space should support that. Her perspective, that even something as seemingly inconsequential as office decor mattered, was characteristic of how Vanessa approached life. Everything was intentional, considered. Nothing was without purpose. We fell into a rhythm that accommodated both our demanding careers. Tuesday and Thursday evenings were sacred. No work calls, no hospital emergencies unless absolutely critical. Weekend mornings were for coffee and conversation before the world intruded. We kept toiletries and changes of clothes at each other's apartments, though we maintained our separate spaces. 6 months into our relationship, I realized with startling clarity that I was genuinely happy, not in the fleeting way of new infatuation, but in the steady, grounded manner of someone whose life has found its proper alignment. My work felt meaningful. My relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine affection. My understanding of my own worth had evolved beyond the narrow metrics my family had instilled. I had not, however, found a way to bridge the growing distance with my parents and brother. Our interactions had become perfunctory, brief phone calls on birthdays and holidays, superficial exchanges about weather and local sports teams. I had informed them of my promotion via email, receiving congratulatory responses that acknowledged the achievement without engaging with its significance. The fragile détente shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when my assistant interrupted a client meeting with news that my mother was trying to reach me urgently. "I'm sorry, Mr. Parker," she said, her expression conveying the seriousness of the situation. "Your mother says it's an emergency regarding your father." I excused myself from the meeting, heart pounding as I returned the call from the privacy of my office. "Noah?" My mother's voice was uncharacteristically shaky. "Your father had a heart attack this morning. He's at Wellesley Medical Center. They're preparing him for surgery now." The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. Despite our complicated relationship, despite the hurt and disappointment, the thought of my larger-than-life father suddenly vulnerable sent a cold wave of fear through me. "How bad is it?" I managed to ask, already reaching for my jacket. "Bad. Enough," she replied, strain evident in her voice. "The doctor mentioned something about multiple blockages. Tyler's on his way. Can you come?" "I'm leaving now," I assured her, already texting Wallace about the family emergency. The drive to Wellesley felt interminable, my mind cycling through worst-case scenarios and unresolved conversations. My father and I had barely spoken since the dinner with Vanessa. What if those dismissive words, that booming laugh at my expense, were among our final interactions? I called Vanessa from the car, the hands-free connection allowing me to focus on navigating the increasingly heavy traffic. "I can meet you there," she offered immediately after I explained the situation. "Not as your girlfriend, but as a doctor who can help you understand what's happening." Her offer touched me deeply. "Are you sure? You have patients. I can reschedule my afternoon clinic." "This is important, Noah." By the time I reached the cardiac care unit waiting room, Tyler was already there, pacing with the nervous energy that characterized him in times of stress. My mother sat rigidly in a vinyl chair, her normally perfect makeup slightly smudged, her hands clutching her purse as if it were a life preserver. "Any updates?" I asked, setting aside the tension of recent months to embrace her briefly. "He's in surgery now," she replied, her voice thin. "The doctor said it could be several hours." Tyler acknowledged me with a nod, continuing his restless movement. "They're doing a triple bypass. Apparently he's been having chest pains for weeks but didn't tell anyone." That sounded exactly like my father, dismissing physical warning signs as weakness, pushing through discomfort rather than addressing its cause. The same approach he applied to emotional matters, to family conflicts, to anything that couldn't be conquered through sheer force of will. "Mrs. Parker?" A nurse appeared in the doorway. "The surgical team asked me to update you. Your husband is stable, but the procedure is more complex than initially anticipated. Dr. Sawyer will speak with you when it's complete." My mother nodded mutely, the fear she was trying to mask visible in her eyes. I sat beside her, unsure if my presence was a comfort or an additional stress given our recent distance. "I called Pastor Mike," Tyler informed us, finally taking a seat across from us. "He's coming by later to pray with us." I nodded, though organized religion had never been central to my life the way it was for Tyler and my parents. My brother had found community and purpose in the large evangelical church our parents attended, even meeting his wife Amber through its young adults program. "That's good," I said, meaning it despite our differences. Whatever brought comfort in this moment of crisis was valuable. The waiting rooms slowly filled with familiar faces, church members, my father's colleagues from the distribution company, neighbors from my parents' street. The Parker family was well connected in Wellesley, my father's larger-than-life personality, and my mother's social networking ensuring a wide circle of acquaintances, if not deep friendships. Vanessa arrived an hour into our vigil, still wearing scrubs under her coat, her hospital ID badge clipped to her pocket. I rose to meet her, profoundly grateful for her presence. "Thank you for coming," I said quietly, conscious of the curious glances from family friends who had never met her. She squeezed my hand. "Of course. Have you spoken with the surgical team yet?" "Just brief updates through the nurse. The cardiologist will come talk to us after the surgery." Vanessa nodded. Triple bypasses are common procedures, but they're still major surgery. The fact that they're taking extra time suggests they're being thorough, which is good. I introduced her to my mother, who managed a polite if reserved greeting. Tyler, however, made no effort to hide his discomfort, offering only a curt nod before deliberately engaging one of the church elders in conversation. As the hours passed, Vanessa proved invaluable, not only in translating medical terminology, when updates came, but in her quiet, steady presence beside me. She brought coffee for everyone, helped an elderly church member locate the chapel, and somehow found a charging cable for my mother's dying phone. Small gestures that demonstrated exactly the qualities I had come to cherish in her: thoughtfulness, practical compassion, the ability to ease suffering in whatever way possible. It was nearly 7 p.m. when Dr. Sawyer finally appeared, surgical cap in hand, eyes tired but alert. We all stood as he approached my mother. "Mrs. Parker, your husband made it through surgery," he began, his tone measured. "We successfully bypassed 3 blocked arteries. He's currently in recovery and will be moved to the ICU shortly." The collective relief in the room was palpable. My mother's shoulders sagged slightly as the tension she'd been holding released. "When can we see him?" she asked. "He'll be heavily sedated tonight. I recommend you go home and rest. You can visit tomorrow morning when he's more likely to be conscious." Dr. Sawyer turned to address the wider group. "The next 48 hours are critical, but Mr. Parker has several factors in his favor. He's otherwise healthy, the damage to the heart muscle appears minimal, and we were able to establish good blood flow to all areas." Vanessa stepped forward slightly. "Dr. Sawyer, I'm Dr. Mitchell from Mass General. Would you mind if I asked about the post-operative care plan? Mr. Parker's son is my partner, and I'd like to help the family understand what to expect." I watched, as the surgeon's demeanor shifted subtly, one medical professional to another, as he outlined the recovery protocol in more technical detail than he had offered us. Vanessa asked targeted questions about medication management and rehabilitation, taking notes on her phone. As the crowd began to disperse, plans forming for a rotation of visitors and meal deliveries over the coming days, Tyler approached me, for the first time since I'd arrived. "So she's still around," he commented, glancing toward Vanessa, who was speaking quietly with my mother. Thought maybe that would have fizzled out by now. The implied criticism might have provoked me months ago. Now I recognized it as a reflection of his own insecurity rather than a genuine assessment of my relationship. "We're doing well," I replied simply. "She dropped everything to be here today." Tyler studied me for a moment. "Mom appreciates it, having a doctor explain things." He paused, then added with reluctant acknowledgement, "She seems decent." Coming from Tyler, this qualified as effusive praise. "She is. More than decent." My brother shifted uncomfortably. "Look, about what Dad said that night at dinner. You know he didn't mean—" "He meant exactly what he said," I interrupted, not unkindly. "And that's between him and me. Today isn't about that." Tyler nodded, accepting the boundary. "Are you staying at the house tonight? Mom shouldn't be alone." The question presented a choice: step back into my established role in the family system or maintain the healthier distance I'd established. "I'll stay," I decided. "But I need to make some work arrangements first. I'll meet you there." After the others had left, Vanessa and I sat in the now quiet waiting room, processing the events of the day. "Thank you," I said again, the words inadequate, for the depth of my gratitude. For being here. For helping my family understand what's happening. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture I'd come to recognize as one of her few tells when she was contemplating something significant. "I noticed something today," she said, "about your family dynamics." "Oh?" I braced myself, unsure what insight she might have gleaned from our crisis mode interactions. "Your mother relied on you. Not Tyler, though he was there first. Not the pastor or your father's colleagues. When the doctor was explaining the recovery process, she kept looking to you to gauge your reaction. I hadn't noticed this, too caught up in my own anxiety and the medical information being shared. That doesn't match our usual pattern." "Maybe the crisis reveals the truth that comfort conceals," Vanessa suggested. "Tyler was busy organizing prayer chains and managing the social aspects. You were focused on understanding what was happening and what needed to be done." Her observations settled into me slowly. "Different strengths for different purposes," I murmured, echoing her words from months earlier. "Exactly. And today, your strength was exactly what your mother needed." The next morning, I arrived at the hospital early, having spent a restless night in my childhood bedroom. The house had felt both familiar and foreign. The same furniture and photos, the same creaking stair on the way to the second floor. But now viewed through the lens of my evolved understanding of myself and my family. My father was awake when I entered the ICU, though clearly groggy from medication. Tubes and wires connected him to various monitors, his complexion pallid against the white hospital linens. Most striking was how diminished he appeared, the boisterous, commanding presence reduced to a vulnerable patient in a hospital gown. "Noah," he acknowledged, his voice raspy from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier that morning. "How are you feeling?" I asked, taking the chair beside his bed. "Like I got hit by a truck." He attempted a weak smile. "Your mother said you stayed at the house last night." I nodded. Wanted to make sure she wasn't alone. A silence stretched between us, filled with the beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital staff beginning their morning routines. "The doctor said I was lucky," my father finally said, gazing at the ceiling. "If I'd waited much longer to go to the ER," he left the implication hanging. "Why did you ignore the warning signs?" I asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. He shrugged slightly, wincing at the movement. "Thought it was indigestion, stress. Told myself I didn't have time to be sick." The admission was revealing. My father, who had built his identity around strength and resilience, unable to acknowledge vulnerability even when his life depended on it. "They said I need to make changes," he continued. "Diet, exercise, stress management." He pronounced the last term with mild disdain, as if it were a trendy concept rather than a medical necessity. Those changes could give you many more years, I pointed out. With Mom. With future grandchildren someday. My father's eyes, so like my own, finally met mine directly. Your doctor girlfriend explained all that. Came by this morning before her shift. Surprise coursed through me. Vanessa was here? He nodded. Around 6, said she wanted to check on me before heading to Mass General. Explained what happens after a bypass in terms I could actually understand. I hadn't known she planned to visit. She must have come directly, from her apartment after leaving me at my parents' house the night before. She's something else, your Vanessa, my father continued, an unfamiliar note in his voice. Smart, direct, kind, but no nonsense. Yes, she is, I agreed, watching him. Carefully, she mentioned your promotion, said you're managing a team now, handling the company's biggest accounts. So they had discussed more than just his medical condition. That's right. My father was quiet for a moment. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of his heart monitor. I was wrong, he finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. At that dinner. What I said about you. About her being too good for you. The statement hung in the air between us, fragile and unprecedented. In my 28 years, I had never heard my father admit he was wrong about anything substantial. Nearly dying apparently gives a man some perspective, he continued when I didn't immediately respond. Makes you think about what actually matters, about the kind of father I've been. Dad, you don't need to. I do, he interrupted, his voice stronger despite his weakened state. I need to say this while I still can. I've measured success one way my entire life, by how much you earn, what position you hold, what others think of your achievements. It's how my father measured me, and I couldn't imagine any other standard. He paused, gathering strength. But lying in that ER yesterday, thinking I might not make it, I wasn't proud of my sales numbers or management position. I was thinking about you kids, about your mother, about whether you'd remember me with love, or just relief that I was gone. The raw honesty shocked me more than his medical crisis had. Dennis Parker had never been one for emotional introspection or vulnerability. Your girlfriend, Vanessa, she told me something this morning that hit me hard. She said in her line of work, she's never heard a dying person express regret about not working more hours or making more money. They regret relationships they neglected, kindness they withheld, love they were too afraid or proud to express. I could hear Vanessa's cadence in the words, her compassionate directness. She had given my father the same gift she had given me, a different lens through which to view what truly matters. I don't know if I can change completely, my father admitted. Old dogs, new tricks and all that. But I'm going to try to see you, all of you, more clearly, to value what you actually are rather than what I thought you should be. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the clinical reminders of human fragility, something long broken between us began, tentatively, to mend, not with grand gestures or complete transformation, but with the simple acknowledgement that there were different ways to measure a life well lived, and that perhaps, just perhaps, mine wasn't as lacking as he had always believed. What neither of us could have anticipated was how this fragile reconciliation would soon be tested by an unexpected development in Vanessa's career, one that would force all of us to put our evolving perspectives to the ultimate test, and would challenge not just my relationship with my father, but my deepest understanding of success, sacrifice, and what it means to truly support someone you love. My father's recovery progressed steadily over the following weeks. The man who returned home from the hospital was physically diminished, but somehow more present than he had been before, listening more than talking during family visits, observing with newfound attentiveness the dynamics between my mother, Tyler, and me. I established a routine of visiting my parents' house every Sunday afternoon. sometimes with Vanessa when her schedule permitted. These visits, once sources of tension and discomfort, gradually evolved into something resembling genuine family time. My mother, initially reserved around Vanessa, began to thaw as she witnessed not only my girlfriend's medical expertise, but her authentic care for our family's well-being. She showed me how to organize Dad's medications, my mother admitted during one of my solo visits, arranging flowers Vanessa had sent for my father's 2-month recovery milestone. Created a chart with times and dosages that even your father can follow. The small acknowledgement represented significant progress from the woman who had sat silently during my father's humiliation of me at that first dinner. At work, I settled more confidently into my leadership role, developing my own management style that emphasized collaboration and clarity rather than authority and competition. My team responded positively, our department's client satisfaction metrics climbing steadily. Wallace mentioned expansion plans for the division, suggesting that my approach might become a model for other regions. Life felt balanced in a way I'd never experienced, challenging but not overwhelming, with purpose at work and fulfillment. In my personal relationships, the ground beneath me, once shifting with insecurity and self-doubt, had solidified into something I could trust. Then came the Wednesday evening in December, when Vanessa arrived at my apartment uncharacteristically late, her expression a complex mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Sorry about dinner," she said, shrugging off her coat to reveal scrubs rather than her usual business attire on clinic days. "Emergency surgery ran long, and then Dr. Abernathy wanted to speak with me privately." "Everything okay?" I asked, sensing something significant in her demeanor as I handed her a glass of the red wine I'd opened earlier. Vanessa took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the stemware. "I've been offered an incredible opportunity. Abernathy has been developing a pediatric surgical program in collaboration with a hospital in Seattle. They're focusing on advanced techniques for treating childhood brain tumors." "Seattle," I repeated, the geographical distance immediately apparent. "That's quite a move." "The program is revolutionary, Noah. They're combining surgical approaches with targeted immunotherapy in ways that could dramatically improve survival rates for conditions that are currently nearly untreatable." Her eyes lit up as she described the technical aspects of the research, the potential outcomes for children who currently had few options. This was Vanessa at her core, passionate about advancing medicine, driven by the possibility of saving lives others had deemed unsavable. "They want me to join the founding surgical team," she concluded, "to help develop and implement the protocols from the ground up." "That's incredible," I said, meaning it despite the knot forming in my stomach. "It sounds perfect for you." "It's a 3-year commitment initially," she continued, watching me carefully, "with potential for extension if the program succeeds as we hope it will." 3 years, on the opposite coast. The implications hung between us, unaddressed but unavoidable. "When would you need to decide?" I asked, buying time to process my conflicting emotions. "They'd like an answer within the month. The program launches in April." April. Barely 4 months away. "What are you thinking?" she asked after a moment of silence. I considered deflecting, offering platitudes about supporting her career. Instead, I chose honesty. "I'm thinking that this sounds like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you professionally, and I'm thinking that I'm not ready to lose you." Vanessa set down her wine glass and moved to sit beside me on the couch. "Those don't have to be mutually exclusive thoughts, Noah. Seattle is 3,000 miles away," I pointed out. "Long distance, relationships are challenging under the best circumstances. With your schedule and the intensity of launching a new program." "I know," she acknowledged, "but there are options. Mass General has a reciprocal relationship with several Seattle hospitals. I've already inquired about potential visiting surgeon, arrangements that might allow me to split my time between both cities, at least initially." The fact that she had already begun exploring compromises touched me deeply. "You've been thinking about this?" "Of course I have. This relationship matters. To me, Noah, you matter to me. She took my hand, her expression earnest. But I also need to be honest about what this opportunity means professionally. The work we'd be doing could change outcomes for thousands of children. I would never ask you to sacrifice that, I assured her, squeezing her hand. That passion, that commitment to making a meaningful difference, it's part of who you are. It's part of why I love you. The words slipped out naturally, without premeditation. We had been dancing around the sentiment for months, expressing it in actions rather than declaration. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. That's the first time you've said that. It's been true for a while, I admitted, surprising myself with the ease of the confession. I just wasn't sure if... I love you too, she interrupted, her smile radiant, despite the complicated circumstances. Which is why this decision is so difficult. In the past, career advancement was always the obvious choice. Now, there are other considerations that matter just as much. We talked until well past midnight, exploring possibilities, acknowledging challenges, and ultimately agreeing that we needed time to consider options individually before making any joint decisions. This isn't a tonight conversation, Vanessa concluded as she prepared to leave, both of us needing space to process. But I want you to know that whatever happens, this isn't something I'm taking lightly. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, contemplating the crossroads we faced. The old Noah, the one who had existed before Vanessa, before my promotion, before my father's heart attack, would have immediately assumed the relationship was over. Would have accepted that someone like Vanessa would naturally prioritize her exceptional career over a relationship with an ordinary insurance adjuster from Boston. But I wasn't that person anymore. The past year had taught me that relationships weren't about hierarchies of worth or calculating what someone deserved. They were about genuine connection, mutual support, and the recognition that different strengths and priorities could complement rather than compete with each other. Still, the practical challenges remained. My career was flourishing in Boston. My family, especially as my father recovered, needed support close by. Vanessa's professional opportunity was across the country, in a city where I had no connections, no established career path. Sleep eluded me that night as I wrestled with questions that had no simple answers. By morning, I had reached only one clear conclusion. Whatever decision we made needed to honor both our individual needs and our commitment to each other. Finding that balance would require creativity, compromise, and courage from both of us. Over. The following week, I approached the situation methodically, researching Seattle's insurance industry, exploring whether my company had offices in the Pacific Northwest, and considering what remote work arrangements might be possible. Wallace surprised me with his openness when I broached the subject hypothetically. The client relations model you've developed here could be valuable in other regions, he observed during our weekly one-on-one, including the West Coast, where we've struggled with retention rates. It's something worth discussing if circumstances change for you personally. His perceptiveness, recognizing there was a specific reason for my inquiry without pressing for details, reinforced my appreciation for his management style. I debated discussing the situation with my parents, uncertain how my father in particular would respond to the possibility of me moving across the country for Vanessa's career. His recent health crisis had begun a transformation in our relationship, but old patterns of judgment and expectation weren't easily erased. The decision was made for me when my mother called, inviting Vanessa and me to Sunday dinner. Your father is feeling much stronger, she explained. He'd like to have a proper family meal. Tyler and Amber will be there too. The prospect of another family dinner initially triggered anxiety, memories of that disastrous first gathering still vivid. But things had changed, both within me and within my family dynamics. This time, we accepted with cautious optimism. Sunday arrived with clear skies and unseasonable warmth for December in New England. My parents' house looked festive with holiday decorations, my mother having channeled her nervous energy about my father's recovery into earlier than usual Christmas preparations. "Noah, Vanessa," my father greeted us at the door, still moving carefully, but looking significantly healthier than he had in the hospital. "Come in, come in." The contrast to our previous visit was immediate. My father ushered us into the living room where Tyler and his wife Amber were already seated, refreshments arranged on the coffee table. The atmosphere was welcoming rather than evaluative, my mother even embracing Vanessa briefly before offering drinks. "Sparkling water for me," my father announced with a rueful smile. "Doctor's orders, but the rest of you should enjoy the wine. It's a good one. I had Tyler pick it up from that shop Vanessa mentioned last time she was here." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, remembering Vanessa's casual comment about a local wine store, spoke volumes about his efforts to be more attentive, more considerate. Dinner progressed pleasantly, the conversation flowing naturally between updates on my father's recovery, Tyler's recent business trip to Chicago, and amusing anecdotes from Amber's first-grade classroom where she taught. Vanessa shared a heartwarming story about a former patient who had visited the hospital to show off his college acceptance letter, 5 years after she had performed surgery to remove a benign brain tumor. "That must be incredibly gratifying," my mother commented, genuine interest in her voice. "Seeing the long-term impact of your work." "It's what makes the difficult days worthwhile," Vanessa agreed. "Knowing that the child on your operating table has an entire future ahead of them, if you can just solve this one critical problem." "Speaking of careers," my father said, setting down his water glass with deliberate care, "Linda mentioned you might have some news, Vanessa? Something about a research opportunity?" Vanessa glanced at me, surprise evident in her expression. I was equally caught off guard. I hadn't mentioned Seattle to anyone in my family. "It's still very preliminary," she began cautiously. "I've been invited to join a specialized surgical program focusing on pediatric brain tumors. It's an exciting opportunity professionally." "In Seattle," my father added, confirming he somehow had specific information. "Quite a distance from Boston." The table fell silent, tension suddenly replacing the comfortable atmosphere of moments before. Tyler looked between us with undisguised curiosity, while Amber studied her plate with the careful neutrality of someone witnessing potential family drama. "How did you know about that?" I asked my father directly. "Dr. Abernathy's wife is on the hospital board with Frank Chambers, my golf buddy," he explained. "Small world. Frank mentioned it when he visited last week, asked if you'd be moving out west with Vanessa. The old Dennis Parker would have presented this information as a challenge, a way to put me on the defensive. But his tone now was different, not confrontational, but genuinely inquiring. "We're still discussing options," I replied, looking at Vanessa, who nodded in agreement. "It's a complex situation." "Long distance is tough," Tyler commented, breaking his silence. "Amber and I tried it for 6 months when she was doing her teaching practicum in Springfield. Nearly broke us." "Every relationship is different," Amber countered gently. "And there are more flexible work arrangements now than there were when we were dating." My father cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Noah, could I speak with you privately for a moment? In my study." The request surprised me, but I agreed, following him to the small room off the living room that had served as his home office for as long as I could remember. Sports memorabilia and business awards lined the shelves, physical testimony to the values that had driven his life choices. He settled carefully into his leather desk chair, gesturing for me to take the seat opposite. "So, Seattle. It's not decided yet," I began, prepared to defend the possibility of moving or attempting a long-distance relationship. "Vanessa's exploring arrangements that might allow her to split time between both cities, and I'm looking into whether my company has—" "Noah," he interrupted gently. "I didn't bring you in here to talk you out of anything." That stopped me short. "You didn't?" "No. He leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. I wanted to tell you something I've never told anyone, not even your mother. My curiosity piqued. I waited as he gathered his thoughts. When I was 26, about your age, when you started at the insurance company, I was offered a position with a distribution firm in California. Better salary, more responsibility than I had at the time. A real opportunity to advance quickly. This was news to me. My father had worked for the same company his entire career, starting on the loading dock and working his way up through the ranks. The idea that he might have taken a different path was difficult to imagine. What happened? I asked. I turned it down. He said simply, your mother's parents were getting older, needed her nearby. We'd just bought the house. My father told me I was a fool to pass up the opportunity. Said I was choosing comfort over ambition. He smiled ruefully. Sound familiar? The parallel to my current situation was unmistakable. Why are you telling me this now? My father's eyes, so like my own, held a depth of emotion I rarely saw there. Because for 40 years, I've wondered what might have happened if I'd taken that job. Not because I regret staying. I built a good life here, raised you and Tyler, provided well for our family, but because I made that decision based on what others expected, rather than what I truly wanted. He leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly at the movement. The heart attack changes your perspective, makes you see how short life really is, how easily it can end before you've done the things that matter most to you. And you think I should go to Seattle? I surmised, still trying to understand his unexpected support. I think you should decide, based on what you want your life to be, not on what you think you should want, he clarified. Not on what I or your mother or anyone else thinks is the right choice. The man sitting across from me seemed both familiar and unfamiliar, the father I'd known all my life, yet somehow transformed by his brush with mortality into someone more reflective, more willing to question the certainties that had guided his existence. What if it doesn't work out? I asked, voicing the fear that lingered beneath my practical considerations. What if I move across the country and Vanessa realizes I'm not worth it? My father finished the thought I couldn't bring myself to complete. Son, that's not how love works. Not real love anyway. It's not a balance sheet of what each person brings to the table. It's about choosing each other, every day, through every circumstance. Coming from the man who had laughed at the dinner table and declared Vanessa too good for me, the insight was profound. The truth is, he continued, I was wrong about you. About both of you. What I saw as her being too good for you was actually just two people with different strengths valuing each other for exactly who they are. He paused, then added with uncharacteristic vulnerability. It's what your mother and I have at our best moments, though I haven't always recognized it or expressed it well. As we rejoined the others in the dining room, I felt a shifting of something fundamental, not just in my relationship with my father, but in my understanding of partnership, of what it meant to support someone you love as they pursued their purpose. The conversation around the table had continued in our absence, Vanessa describing the innovative aspects of the Seattle program, while my mother and Amber asked thoughtful questions. Tyler, surprisingly, was discussing potential business contacts he had in the Pacific Northwest, who might be useful connections if we relocated. Everything okay? Vanessa asked quietly as I took my seat beside her. Yes, I replied, meaning it. Completely for perhaps the first time in my relationship with my family. Actually, better than okay. What I couldn't have known in that moment of clarity was that the decision about Seattle would soon be complicated by an unexpected development in my own career, an opportunity that would force both Vanessa and me to confront our deepest values about success, sacrifice, and what it truly means to support each other's growth. The journey that had begun with humiliation at my parents' dinner table was about to come full circle in ways none of us could have anticipated. The email from Wallace arrived 2 days after the surprisingly pleasant family dinner. Subject line: Confidential, strategic opportunity. Its contents would reshape the already complex decision Vanessa and I faced. "Noah," it began, "following our conversation about West Coast possibilities, I've expedited discussions with the executive team. We're preparing to launch a Pacific Northwest regional office, based in Portland, Oregon. I'd like you to consider taking the lead as regional director, implementing your client relations model on a broader scale. This would involve building a team from the ground up with significant autonomy and resources. Details attached for your review. This opportunity aligns with our expansion strategy, but the accelerated timeline is, frankly, motivated by my desire to retain your talents within the organization. Please consider carefully and let's discuss when you're ready. Portland, just under 3 hours from Seattle by car, close enough for a weekend commute, possibly even a longer daily commute if necessary. The position would represent a substantial promotion, greater responsibility, increased compensation, and the chance to implement my approach to client relations across an entire region rather than just one department. I stared at my computer screen, a complex mixture of emotions washing over me. The timing seemed too perfect, too convenient. Part of me wondered if Wallace had created this opportunity, specifically to retain me after sensing my potential departure. Another part recognized that regardless of motivation, this represented exactly the kind of role I had been working toward, one that leveraged my strengths and offered genuine impact on the company's direction. Most significantly, it potentially solved the geographic challenge of Vanessa's Seattle opportunity. We could both pursue our professional goals while maintaining our relationship, a compromise that didn't require either of us to sacrifice our ambitions or separate. I waited until evening to call Vanessa, wanting to process my thoughts before sharing the news. She answered on the 4th ring, the sounds of the hospital audible in the background. "Can you talk?" I asked, hearing her footsteps as she presumably moved to a quieter location. "Just finished a consult. What's up?" Her voice shifted from professional efficiency to warmth as she focused on our conversation. "I received an interesting email today. From Wallace. I explained the Portland opportunity, the regional director role, and the timing that aligned so perfectly with her Seattle position. Her initial silence made me nervous. "Vanessa? What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it sounds almost too perfect," she finally replied, echoing my own earlier thought. "Portland is close enough to make a relationship workable, while we both pursue these opportunities." "But," I prompted, sensing hesitation beneath her measured response. "But I'm wondering if this is the right solution for the right reasons," she said carefully. "Noah, is this what you truly want professionally? Or would you be taking this position primarily to be near me?" The question cut to the heart of the matter. Was I excited about the Portland role because of its professional potential? Or was I grasping at a convenient solution to our geographic dilemma? Both, I admitted after consideration. The position itself is exciting, building something from the ground up, implementing the approach I've developed here on a larger scale. But yes, the proximity to Seattle is a significant factor. In my interest. "That's fair," she acknowledged. "I just don't want you making a career decision you might regret later because of our relationship. That kind of sacrifice can breed resentment over time." Her concern touched me deeply. This brilliant surgeon, who could have anyone she wanted, worried about my professional fulfillment rather than just her own. "The same applies to you," I pointed out. "Your compromises around splitting time between cities or limiting your involvement in the program." "True," she agreed. "We both need to be honest about what matters most to us professionally and personally. These aren't decisions to make lightly." We agreed to take the weekend to consider our options individually before making any joint decisions. "Let's meet Sunday evening," Vanessa suggested. "My place. No distractions, just us figuring this out together." The intervening days were filled with practical research, housing markets in Portland, commute options between the two cities, insights from colleagues who had managed similar arrangements. I created spreadsheets comparing costs of living, salary, adjustments, and potential career trajectories. The analytical approach helped channel my nervous energy, but I knew ultimately this decision wouldn't be made solely on practical considerations. Sunday evening arrived with unexpected snowfall, transforming Boston into a quieter, softer version of itself. I arrived at Vanessa's Cambridge apartment to find she had prepared dinner, a rarity given her schedule, and set the dining table with candles and wine. "This looks suspiciously like a special occasion," I observed, hanging my snow-dusted coat by the door. "It is," she replied, kissing me briefly before returning to the kitchen. "Regardless of what we decide about Seattle and Portland, tonight is about us affirming what matters most." Over roasted salmon and vegetables, we shared our individual reflections from the past few days. Vanessa had spoken at length with Dr. Abernathy about the Seattle program's flexibility, confirming that while her physical presence would be required for surgeries and critical planning sessions, some administrative and research components could potentially be conducted remotely. "The program is groundbreaking, but not necessarily location-dependent for every aspect," she explained. "Modern medicine is increasingly collaborative across institutions and distances." I shared Wallace's additional insights about the Portland position, the 3-year strategic plan for the region, the autonomy I would have in building the team, the potential for advancement within the broader organization if the expansion proved successful. "It sounds like the perfect next step for your career," Vanessa observed, "even setting aside our geographic considerations." "It does," I agreed. "But leaving Boston means leaving my established network, my team here, and my family, just when relationships are beginning to heal." We lingered over dinner, discussing these practical considerations, but also deeper questions about what we each wanted from our careers and relationship. The conversation flowed easily, without the anxiety that had characterized our initial discussions about Seattle. As Vanessa served coffee and the chocolate mousse she'd picked up from our favorite bakery, she set a small wrapped box beside my dessert plate. "What's this?" I asked, surprised by the unexpected gift. "Open it," she encouraged, an uncharacteristic nervousness in her expression. Inside was a silver compass, its weight substantial in my palm, its design classic and elegant. On the back, an inscription. "Different paths, same direction. Always." "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and its symbolism. "But what's the occasion?" Vanessa took a deep breath, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Noah, the past year has changed me in ways I never expected. Before you, my path was clear. Career advancement, professional recognition, measurable achievements. Success had a specific definition, and relationships were secondary priorities." She squeezed my hand gently. "You've shown me that true fulfillment comes from connection, from bringing your authentic self to both work and relationships, that the metrics I used to measure my life were incomplete." "You've done the same for me," I responded, feeling the weight of the moment. "Helped me see value in qualities I always dismissed as ordinary or unremarkable." Vanessa nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We've been so focused on the practical aspects of these opportunities, the geography, the scheduling, the logistics. But I keep coming back to one fundamental question that makes all those details secondary. What kind of life do I want to build, and who do I want to build it with?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. "And what answer have you found?" "That I want a life of purpose and impact. Yes, the work in Seattle represents that. But I also want a life shared with someone who sees me completely, challenges me to grow, and reminds me to find joy beyond the operating room." Her eyes, so often confident and assured, now held a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. "I want that life with you, Noah." The simple declaration hung between us, profound in its clarity. "The compass isn't just about our potential geographic separation," she continued. "It's about the journey we're on together, regardless of physical location. Different paths, same direction. In that moment, the anxiety that had lingered beneath our practical planning dissolved. The question wasn't whether we could make Seattle and Portland work logistically. It was whether we were committed to creating a shared life, despite the challenges distance might present. I want that too, I said finally, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. A life with purpose, with impact. A life with you. We decided to accept our respective opportunities. Vanessa in Seattle, me in Portland. The proximity made a II commuter relationship feasible, at least initially. We would maintain both apartments for the first year, spending weekends together and evaluating longer-term living arrangements as our roles evolved. It won't be easy, Vanessa acknowledged, as we outlined our plan. We'll both be establishing ourselves in new environments, new professional communities. But we'll be doing it together, I reminded her. Different cities, same journey. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparations, giving notice at our current positions, researching housing options in our new cities, and determining what to keep, sell, or store from our Boston lives. Throughout the practical chaos, our decision remained solid. Our commitment to making it work unwavering. My parents' reaction to our news was perhaps the most surprising development. My father, continuing his post-heart attack evolution, offered practical support rather than judgment. Portland's housing market is competitive, he noted during a family dinner where we'd shared our decisions. I have a former colleague in commercial real estate there. Let me connect you. He might help you find something reasonable before the vultures descend. My mother, always practical, focused on logistics. You'll need proper winter gear for the Pacific Northwest. Different kind of cold than Boston. Wetter, seeps into your bones. I'll put together a list. Tyler, ever competitive, couldn't resist. One last brotherly jab. So you're moving across the country to follow your girlfriend's career? Bold strategy, bro. Before I could respond, my father surprised everyone at the table. He's not following anyone, Tyler. They're both pursuing opportunities that align with their values and strengths, supporting each other without sacrificing their individual paths. He glanced at my mother. Something your mother and I could have done better at times. The admission and implicit apology rendered Tyler momentarily speechless, a rare achievement that I savored silently. As our departure date approached, Vanessa and I agreed to one last weekend in Boston before the cross-country move. We visited our favorite spots, the cafe where we'd had our first real date after City Hall, the path along the Charles River where we'd walked countless miles in conversation, the small neighborhood restaurants that had become our regular haunts. On our final evening, we found ourselves back at City Hall, standing outside the building where we'd met while contesting parking tickets. Full circle, Vanessa observed, linking her arm through mine as we gazed up at the brutalist architecture that had been the unlikely setting for our first encounter. Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if the city's parking enforcement hadn't been so aggressively efficient that day? I mused. She laughed, the sound as genuine and unguarded as it had been that first day in the basement waiting room. I probably would have continued prioritizing work above everything else, measuring success by publications and procedures performed. And I would have kept believing I was exactly as ordinary as my family always suggested, I added, never pushing beyond what was comfortable or expected. So much has changed, she reflected. Not just our careers or location, but how we see ourselves and each other. I thought about that first disastrous dinner at my parents' house, my father's booming laugh, his dismissive words. She's too good for you, son. The humiliation that had burned through me, confirming every insecurity I'd harbored about my relationship with this brilliant, accomplished woman. Your parents were right, you know, Vanessa said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. But not in the way they meant it. How so? I asked, curious about her perspective. You are too good. For me in some ways, she explained. her expression serious despite her slight smile. Too good at seeing people beyond their accomplishments or failures. Too good at finding meaning in everyday interactions that others might dismiss as insignificant. Too good at maintaining your integrity when it would be easier to compromise. The redefinition of my father's cruel assessment into something affirming embodied everything I had come to cherish about Vanessa. Her ability to recognize value where others saw deficiency, to reframe limitations as unique strengths. "And you're too good for me in your own ways," I countered. "Too good at maintaining clarity of purpose when obstacles arise. Too good at challenging assumptions, including your own. Too good at balancing ambition with compassion." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, Boston's evening activity flowing around us, commuters heading home, tourists consulting maps, couples like us enjoying the mild spring evening. "Different strengths, complementary purposes," Vanessa summarized, echoing words she had spoken months earlier when helping me understand my value. Maybe that's what partnership truly is. Not finding someone exactly like you or someone who completes your deficiencies, but someone whose unique strengths align with and amplify your own. As we walked back toward Cambridge, planning last minute, packing strategies and comparing flight details for our upcoming moves, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. From questioning my worth in this relationship, to understanding that worth differently, not as a hierarchical comparison of achievements or status, but as the unique value each person brings to shared life. My father's heart attack had reminded us all how quickly certainties could dissolve, how precious time was when measured against life's fragility. That perspective had transformed his rigid value system into something more nuanced, more accepting of different definitions of success and fulfillment. For me, the transformation had been equally profound. The man who had sat at that first dinner, cringing as his father declared him unworthy of his girlfriend's affection, would never have imagined accepting a leadership position across the country, building a bi-city relationship with a brilliant surgeon, or standing confidently in his own worth without constant external validation. The upcoming transition would bring challenges we couldn't yet anticipate. Building new professional communities, navigating weekend commutes between Seattle and Portland, eventually deciding on a shared home location, these practical considerations would require flexibility and compromise from both of us. But the fundamental question had been answered. What kind of life did we want to build, and who did we want to build it with? Different paths, same direction. Always. As we turned onto Vanessa's street, snow beginning to fall gently around us, a final farewell gift from Boston's unpredictable spring weather, I thought about the compass in my pocket. Its weight was comforting, a tangible reminder that even when physically separated, two people could be oriented toward the same destination, guided by shared values and mutual respect. My parents had laughed when I brought my girlfriend to meet them, declaring, "Her too good for me." In doing so, they had inadvertently launched a journey of self-discovery that led me to recognize what was truly good in myself, in Vanessa, and in the unique connection we had built. A connection strong enough to bridge not only physical distance, but the distance between different ways of measuring a life well lived. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And, hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.